With apologies to Stevie Wonder, this week's videos are going to focus on 3 words. Those words are signed, sealed, delivered. You might be familiar with the song. I assure you that the text that I'm going to say or look at this week is not, there's very little parallel between what I'm going to say in the song. But so again, apologies to Stevie Wonder, but I'm going to adopt these for God's purposes. I opened my sermon yesterday talking about the idea of signs and the fact that the signs are absolutely everywhere. We have signs on our houses like our address or the numbers that denote our address. We have signs on our mailboxes. Maybe it's our name. Maybe it is the numbers again. We have signs in our yard such as political signs, on our street signs. We have advertisements and all kinds of other signs as we drive down the road or even walk around the neighborhood. And all of these signs might do something, quote unquote, do something in the sense that they state some fact, such as so-and-so lives in this particular house or a certain restaurant is a certain number of miles ahead. But the reality is that the signs do not, quote unquote, do anything. They just sit there. They stand there. They're attached to something. They're not actively doing anything. The sign does not move. It does not act, it simply exists. But it does exist to notify. To say it differently, the sign does not do, it simply is. Well, the word is a part of the verb being, B-E-I-N-G. Most learn this truth even before we enter into school, but it is formalized in school. We are taught that we do not say, I are. We are taught that we don't say, he am, or she am. We say, he is, she is, it is. We say, I am, or you are. We understand at a very early age, we are corrected when we misuse, and we are taught formally in school that there is a pattern to the use of the being verb. And then whatever follows the is or the are or the am is some sort of description. It's an adjective, or maybe there's another adjective or something with it, or a noun in some ways, but it is some way to describe the person or the persons that are being referenced. You are a son, she is a daughter, whatever it might be. But as humans, we often look to people for what they do or what they don't do, rather than who they are. If we consider this idea in light of signs, we look for signs about how to identify people based upon what they do rather than who they are. We often base our respect for someone based upon what someone does. For instance, you've likely heard, or maybe you said, I really respect her for doing that. Well, does that mean that the respect is done when the act is done? But the sign that God gave Abraham wasn't for what Abraham did. It was for who Abraham was. Now technically, you could argue with me, and it would be a fair statement. You could argue with me that technically, Andy, Abraham did something. He believed. But how do you prove that? Now again, faith requires obedience. I've said that so many times this year. But when the act of belief happened, God gave him a sign, even in that moment, gave him a promise in that moment with a physical sign to come just because he believed, just because in essence of who Abraham was. See, what we believe about ourselves and what we believe in generally represents who we are, not always what we do, although it should lead to what we do. And just to show in the context of Genesis 15:6, which is the reference that Paul is making here in Romans chapter 4, just to show that Abraham really didn't do anything, he was having a vision. He was in a trance of sorts. God was doing everything. God was doing the speaking. Abraham was just there. He was doing nothing. He was being himself. In Genesis chapter 17, Abraham receives this sign of his faith. Again, 2 chapters, as Rabbi said, 29 years after this being point. The mark that he received, this sign that he received was the sign of circumcision. But circumcision did not make Abraham who he was. Circumcision did not change Abraham other than the mark on his flesh. Abraham was still the same. Now, I should state that who you really are, not just the image that you project to others, and that we all do that at times, right? Who we are should impact what we do. And I'm going to talk more about this in Wednesday's video. For now, let me conclude by stating that what I believe, that I believe it is more than fair to say that we often place a sign on people by what they do. But God does so by who we are. Thus, God's sign is really a mark of who you are, not what you do. God marked Abraham, and God will mark us. But as we will see tomorrow, that mark is more than a sign. It is a seal.